If you are sensitive to your environment, then it makes sense to adapt how you look after yourself according to what is going on around you.
Welcome to Sensitive Stories. This episode is for educational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for treatment with a mental health or medical professional. Let's dive in. Can you start off by telling us how and when you discovered that you're highly sensitive?
Yeah, sure. It's been a bit of a double bounce, I guess, because I had my first sort of introduction when it was, well, I should start by saying that I've always known that I was different, but I think everybody says that.
Yes.
But when I had my first son, which was 2011, he was struggling. It was a difficult birth and he was clearly very sensitive. I've now got two very sensitive boys, and I think it was a friend who said, oh, I wonder if he's highly sensitive. So I can't even remember whether I got a book or I Googled it, but it was on my radar at that point. And although I looked at all of the criteria and was like, oh, yes, 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 it just didn't land. And I think, at that time, I was really struggling, actually. I was having a lot of panic attacks and anxiety, new baby, parenthood, and also he had some developmental delays as well. So there was a lot going on and there was just not space for me to get into it. But it was in the background, chugging along. And at the time as well, I should say, I was a primary school teacher. So I don't know what that would translate to in the States, but I was teaching like year 1 and year 2. So 5, 6, 7-year-olds, and really enjoying it, but getting frequently burnt out. So I think at that point I'd gone down the route of like, it must be me, and then hit a point of like, no, it can't be me. So there's something about, although I love my job, it doesn't love me. So I made a completely radical, and I think a lot of HSPs say this, I had like this pivot moment where I decided I was going to leave a stable job and become a yoga teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And because I'd been working with kids, I sort of transitioned softly. So I started off with teaching kids yoga. And in that journey, I was on Facebook, just a random little scrolling moment, and I came across a person who had commented on somebody who I did my education training with. And they just said, oh, I've left education to become a kids yoga teacher. And very unlike me, I messaged them, and anyway, it's long story short, she's now one of my bestest friends. But in that first meeting, she was like, are you a HSP? And I was like, oh my God. And we and we spent hours just like, oh my gosh, yes, yes. And so it was from that point where I think, because I'd left education by that point and I had like a buddy now to, swap ideas with and talk about it with, that I had space to dive into it. And true to my nature, I just dived into all of the reading and all of the research on the internet. And yeah, I ticked every single box. And, I think when you first find out as well, you go through this phase of like wanting to tell the world, like,
You really do.
did you know about this? Did you know? And perhaps not unsurprisingly, not my family, but my mum and my brother were not too interested. Like, oh yeah, I guess that's you. But but to me it was a really important moment. So yes, I was very grateful to meet my bestie and kind of get immersed into it, because you suddenly feel, and I know everybody who's HSP, when they get that moment, they just feel so seen. And I just felt so seen. And I think a lot of us are seekers. And if you don't have that language, certainly in my home, there was, growing up, there was none of this language of like, oh, well, that's okay that you find these kinds of things difficult because you're an extra sensitive person or whatever. So yeah, it was a real, I guess, connecting back with myself and knowing that it was okay, and also knowing that there was other people out there like me.
Oh, it's when you were telling the part about, oh, I shared this with my family and they weren't as excited about it. I think that's a lot of our experience because it's so meaningful and impactful to finally
Yeah,
know this is my experience. There's language, there's other people that
yeah,
share this, that feel deeply. And it's life changing to have that language. But other people are like,
yeah.
yeah, you're more sensitive. Okay.
Yeah, I was like, right, come round for tea, guys. I'm going to get out the quiz. Let's go through it together. And they're just like,
Yes.
no, I didn't know.
I did the same
Um,
thing. I was in
yeah,
graduate school at the time, and I gave it to every one of the people at my counseling center that I was working with. We just stood around and took the test. You just want to share it. You want to see who else is
yeah, you
HSP
do.
too. Yeah.
Yeah, you can't help but then just see the entire world through that lens. And,
Yeah.
you start going, oh, I wonder if they're highly sensitive. And,
That's
it's like this kind of underground society.
well, it really is. That's how I found out about was through a friend. And then I
Mm,
hear so many other stories. Like, it just finds you.
yeah,
And I think your experience is so relatable in that a lot of times we don't have the space to take it in, but when we do, we just want to go all in, read everything we can,
for
talk to as
sure.
many people as we can.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
it's like a thirst for
Mm.
for understanding yourself, because you've probably, a lot of us, not all of us, but some of us who perhaps didn't have a supportive environment growing up, we've just kind of survived with whatever
Hmm.
coping strategy possible, that there is that hunger because suddenly you're like, oh gosh, this is a way for me to understand myself finally.
Yes.
And like I say, because often we've been seeking, you know, it's like an alleluia kind of moment, isn't it?
It really is. Yeah, looking for that. What is it? For me, it was what is it about me that's different? And I wasn't
Yeah,
finding what it was until I discovered
yeah.
Dr. Aaron's work. I love that. Yeah, we are seeking not just about ourselves, but about meaning and life and the world.
Well, this is like the deep thinking, isn't it? Like
Yes.
we're gonna be overthinking, maybe overthinking, or maybe, maybe it's worthwhile thinking, but it comes with the territory.
It really does. And so you share with me that you've also been diagnosed with ADHD and autism. So I'm curious
Yeah,
what your experience has been if we zoom out with having multiple forms of neurodivergent. What is
yeah.
that like?
Well, I, yeah, I guess it's not been an easy journey, if I'm honest, and I'm
Yeah, I
still
bet.
very much in it because it's not that long ago that I was diagnosed, although I knew
Yes.
I knew,
Mm-hmm.
which partly it's to do with my kids, seeing their neurodivergence play out, and I guess a wealth of experience as well of working with neurodivergent folk. Um, I think the thing is, when I kind of didn't really think about autism or ADHD, and I was just kind of in my HSP world,
Mm-hmm.
I said to my friends who were in this kind of bubble, and my husband, who's also highly sensitive, I think I must be just a really extreme HSP. And I feel like that's quite a common thing with women who are being late diagnosed.
Yeah, definitely.
And there was, although, all the HSP criteria, all of those elements of being HSP, 100%, I'm all in. There were certain things that I couldn't explain, and I remember asking quite a few professionals and other people in the field, like, what's the crossover here? Particularly, I kind of went more towards the autism side to begin with,
Mm-hmm.
but both my children also have ADHD, so I had to, be curious about that.
Yes.
Um, and I went deep into therapy as well, my own therapy. I still see my therapist today. And there was these little questions like, okay, so how much of this is my HSP
Right.
ness, if you like,
Yes.
and how much of this is early trauma,
Yeah.
and how much of this is something else, although we weren't talking about it, but it was in the room.
Right.
Um, so things like eye contact, for example, I find really difficult, and I actually don't give eye contact. I always look at people's mouths, and I, I I raised this in therapy, and she's like, oh, okay, let's just invite this in. It could be to do with this, blah blah blah
Sure.
blah. And just little things like that had kind of got something in my mind to explore. And I think the difficulty I found in starting to seek that out is the inherent problem with labels, actually. Because labels can be really helpful. And I do believe in being able to have labels, particularly if you have been in a minority group. You know, you need a way to you need a way to be able to advocate for yourself, and labels can be really helpful for that. But in my case, sometimes, and still now, I can feel like the labels of HSP, autism, ADHD are like they're boxes, and actually, when humans aren't boxes, and there's no hard lines. And, I've spent far too many minutes, hours, I wouldn't care to add it up, of how much I have researched the overlap between mostly being highly sensitive and autism. And there's lots of opinions about that. And I guess my lived experience is that it's both. And this is my kind of feeling on it, is that there's a collection of traits with huge similarities, little differences here and there. And I think it's perfectly okay that these overlap, and you can feel that those labels describe elements of yourself, So, yeah, I'm still very much in it, if I'm totally honest. I'm still wading my way through, but I do think there is this problem with boxes and trying to squeeze people in. And I, I also think that there is a problem with us sticking hard and fast to those boxes in the professional world as well, because I just don't think it's helpful for people.
It's really not helpful. And how could we ever completely tease apart someone's characteristics? It's
Mm,
impossible. And high sensitivity, autism, ADHD, there are so many overlaps. And what happens is we often
yeah.
end up fighting that, oh, I'm this or that. Well,
Mm,
I think we're sharing experiences here. Why are we battling each other? It always is so
yeah.
concerning for me that we feel like we have to be all of this or all of that. There's no overlap, but there is a lot of overlap,
Yeah.
right? I think we're going to find
Yeah.
we're all kind of related in
Yeah.
these characteristics.
So I was laughing because I was thinking, that is really quite typical black and white thinking, and
Yeah.
that is something that I can find quite difficult, actually. And yeah, it's been helpful for me to do the research and actually come to a really good place of feeling like, actually, no, there's multiple shades of grey, and it's just a collection of traits. And I think the difficulty that we're finding, and I think this is why it's so tricky trying to find, or perhaps not being able to get hold of the right information, particularly if you are, you've been raised female. It's so difficult to spot, most likely because of people pleasing and masking behaviors. So I think this is probably, where I'm at. I'm still kind of unpicking that now and just trying to, yeah, figure it out.
Yeah, it's true. Unfortunately, women are often underrepresented in studies, and so we often have a
Yeah,
different experience. And it does make it problematic to figure out what's going on for me because we only have one version that's been
yeah,
defined and is assumed to be the only way. And we're realizing now there's lots of presentations, not just for
Yeah.
autism, but for high sensitivity and for any type of
Yeah.
neurodivergence.
Yeah.
And so we really need to expand our view as much as we can.
Hugely. And I think
Hugely.
this was the turning point for me was, you know, it I think also it raises how much kind of inherent ableism we have within ourselves, that we're not we, and this is helping me bring it to the surface, really. These kind of preconceived ideas about what ADHD is, what autism is. And even now, even though I've done huge amounts of reading and from people with different lived experiences of different types of neurodivergence, it's still there. I still have to challenge that occasionally and go, oh, hang on, just check yourself there, Nick, because that's not quite right, is it? That it might not present like that. So yeah, lots of learning.
Yes, and yeah, deconstructing these misconceptions we have.
Mm,
And I've heard a lot about this from, I'd say, maybe older generations where the term neurodivergent is a negative, right? And
yeah.
there's a lot of resistance where I feel like I want to embrace it. I see it as, so I'm a lesbian and I see the queer term as kind of being an umbrella term. And I
Mm,
love that. It's like, oh, we're all under this umbrella. I think
mm.
we could hopefully eventually be the same as a neurodivergent person.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
This is what I really, really try to advocate for, is like,
Yeah.
actually it's I mean, my husband uses this idea in our household that we're all neurodivergent, but we all have a slightly different recipe. And it is a little bit like that, different ingredients, but we're under this neurodivergent umbrella. And I really like that. I think the you know, whilst I absolutely want to be positive and neuro affirming about all of these things, there's also the issue of like it being a disability. So autism, and ADHD being a disability, and there's a fine balance to be had between, um, yeah, but in accepting that, really.
Mm-hmm.
Because on the one hand, I'm aware that I have the privilege of being able to mask, of being able to go out into the world and reasonably access it. But the other on the other end of the spectrum, there are occasions when I do feel quite disabled. Um, a lot of that is down to society's accommodate. I don't even like the word accommodations. I can't even think of the right word, but understanding we just need to broaden our horizons.
We really do. So there's more room for people to exist in different ways and there's more supports. Like we're put in
Yeah,
such a narrow box of this is how you function, this is how you show up in the world.
yeah.
And I think everyone who's neurodivergent struggles with that in some way,
Mm,
depending, some more than others, depending on how well you can mask, how high functioning you are. Um, but we really do need space. I think a lot of us are suffering at different levels, or maybe not even feeling like you can function. Because
yeah.
those accommodations or whatever you want to call it, just permission to live differently, is not
Mm,
there. It's
no.
challenging.
In many situations, there's just an assumption of that you're typical, whatever that is.
Well, right,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
true.
so in a in a way, when you are neurodivergent and it's invisible, if you see what I mean, you just have to work so much harder to advocate for yourself. I do this all the time with my children. They may look like they're accessing school okay, but actually at home, when they come home from school, it's like I don't know if you've seen these memes on socials where it's like a firefighter putting out a crazy blaze. Like after school, it's like, okay, how can I regulate them ready for the next day at school?
Well,
These are
it's
very
true. Right.
invisible
Just think
struggles, I think.
about how much they've had to suppress all day long to fit
Yeah,
in,
yeah,
right? And
yeah,
see this with a lot of kids. I don't have any of my own kids, but see this a lot with kids that are in my life where they just fall apart once they get home.
yeah,
They've just been holding in so much all day long. Like finally they can just let their emotions out, they can unmask. And unfortunately,
yeah.
a lot of times these kids, without knowledgeable parents get labeled as having behavioral issues or mental health issues
Mhm.
when really they just maybe need some different supports. And
Yeah.
yeah, it can be tough. Thankfully, you are sounds like a very affirming household and your kids
Yeah.
have space.
I'm laughing because, it is really challenging. The
Sure.
four of us are all neurodivergent, and we have these moments where our neurodivergence is riffing off each other and we're just having a ball and it's awesome. And then there's the others but times when usually it's like sensory issues are clashing, or I've got one child that does like to make maybe stims with his voice, and then another that's hypersensitive to noise,
Right.
for example. That's just one. And yeah, just things like that when they clash. The ebbs
Right.
and the ebbs and
Yeah.
flows are epic.
I bet, right? Everyone is trying to get their needs met, but sometimes
Yeah,
triggering the others. It's
yeah,
tough. Yeah. So
yeah,
speaking on this stuff, I want to transition to how do we take care of ourselves, right? As neurodivergent
yeah.
people, as sensitive people. And I know you really think about self-care in a seasonal perspective. So why is it helpful for us to approach how we care for ourselves seasonally? I'm really curious to hear more about that.
I'm so passionate about this because I've just basically it's how I've kind of figured out how to look after myself, and my kids too. Just on a very basic level, if you are sensitive to your environment, then it makes sense to adapt how you look after yourself according to what is going on around you. Um, and I talk a lot about how each month and each season comes with its own challenges, if you like, sensory challenges or potentials. And I always think, if you have that knowledge, then you're forewarned, aren't you? So you can think, oh, okay, yes, June, July, the light is really bright. So I'm just going to make sure that I have multiple shades in my car, in my bag. And maybe for my part of, a self-care routine, I might lie down and put an eye mask on for a little bit. So yeah, just on a very basic level, we need to adapt to our environment more so, I believe. I think it's good for everybody, but I think more so if you're extra sensitive. And the other thing that I found is that by working seasonally and yeah, going with the rhythm of the seasons, I automatically then become more connected to my own inner cycles as well, because it prompts you to look within. If I'm thinking, okay, so we're in autumn now, aren't we? The leaves are shedding on the trees, the trees are drawing their reserves inwards. What about me? Are my stores filled for winter, or am I feeling a bit spent after the summer? And as you start to get deeper in with this, it brings you much more closely to yourself, I believe. And when we do that, then we just become really powerful as sensitives, because we have the knowledge of what we need. I'm not saying we might find it easy to give ourselves what we need, but the first thing is awareness, isn't it? Knowing where you are, in yourself, in your body, in your mind, your spirit, is really important. And I think when you follow the seasons, that you definitely become more in tune with yourself. And then, that gives you an opportunity to prevent or be kind of more proactive in avoiding things like overwhelm, overstimulation, and maybe burnout, for example. I still have moments where I wouldn't call it burnout, almost like a mini burnout, I guess, but nowhere near like I used to, before I was living in rhythm with the seasons. I also think that, it connects us to nature, and like we spend so much time in our heads. It's like we forget that we are part of nature. So it's like, let's get out of our heads into nature, back into our bodies. And then, yeah, we can start to think at least about giving ourselves what we need.
I love it. Such a beautiful way to come back inward, not just to yourself, but then to connect with the natural rhythms, take those cues from nature. I loved when you said, the trees start to pull inward and kind of replenish
Mm,
themselves, go back and create some reserves. We need to do that as well.
we really do.
We really do.
Yeah, I love autumn. It's my favorite
Me too.
season.
It really is. It's
I'm
so
like,
beautiful.
oh yes, cozy jumpers, candles, an excuse to say no and just
Yeah.
snuggle up with a blanket. Yeah, no, I love it. Um, I think it's also about I feel that for sensitive folk that the way we respond to the seasons is different. So, for example, in spring, there are these energies of like renewal and growth and planting seeds. And whilst, yes, that energy is about, for sensitives, it can be really draining, the spring, because the spring is a transition month. It's about, dragging yourself out of the depths of winter, getting going again, moving that stagnancy. And we're really sensitive to change and transition. So allowing ourselves the grace of moving at the pace that we need. There's no hurry. In traditional folklore, following the wheel of the year, spring, or the start of the growth season, if you like, isn't actually until the spring equinox, which is in March. So how wonderful is that? It's like a free pass all the way to March to just slowly begin, rather than this 1st of January, new intentions, etc. Got to get back on it. There's this, no, actually, yes, it is the start of a new year in terms of the Gregorian calendar, but actually January through to March can be a really slow, beautiful transition. And actually, it allows you to live more intentionally.
It truly does. There's this permission to slow down. You're right.
Mm,
There is this pressure. January 1st, all of a sudden, okay, go, 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 renew
mm,
yourself, make all these changes. But if we can allow ourselves to be in tune with the natural rhythms, we have months to transition,
yeah,
to come out of winter, because it is quite abrupt, especially
yeah.
sensorily wise, the bright lights and the change in temperature and the coming out of our cocoons. It's always so hard for me.
It's so hard for me too. Yeah, it takes a
Yeah.
while.
I'm curious if there's anything that you personally do to help yourself with that coming out of hibernation process.
Yeah, so that January, well, actually, right from December, really, December through to probably the end of February, I have a real issue with the month of February. I don't know if it's just me. I just don't enjoy it. I try, but that 3-month cycle, I spend a lot of time in inner reflection. So journaling, which I also follow the lunar cycle as well, which is really helpful for me to keep touching base. You've got those touch points, the new moon and the full moon, that you can keep touching base with yourself. Um, I will spend a lot of time in meditation. I will do a lot more restorative practice, because you just need quite a lot of rest when you're transitioning. I will start to bring in some movement practices that are particularly helpful at that time, that are quite cleansing, but it will be at a pace that suits me. So yeah, there'll be a lot of quiet time. I also really like going on solitary walks at that time of the year in particular. I do this all through the year, but I do find it um, really important in when there's nothing on the trees at all. Everything's just a bit, I don't like the word bleak, just a bit stark. And where I live, there are different routes different footpaths that I use at different times of the year. And the one that I use during that time, and it's only really at that time because it gets too overgrown the rest of the year, it gives me a really good vista. It's like quite a big expanse of sky that I can see. And so it kind of mirrors what I'm feeling at that time, which is a lot of kind of um, quiet, stillness, but also it gives me a feeling of space. That's just what I do personally, but it's whatever you feel you need,
Yeah,
but there's no rush.
yes, such a good thing to hear. There's no
Yeah.
rush.
Yeah.
And I really, I hadn't considered that, I hadn't considered necessarily tailoring the self-care practice to the seasons. There's certain rituals I'll do with the new
Mm,
moon, with the full moon,
mm,
but just this really seeing what could suit my emotion, my
mm.
needs, depending on what's going on
Yeah.
in my external world. And I love this idea of taking different walking paths to
Mm,
match my mood at the season.
yeah.
That feels really beautiful, and just
Yes.
attuning, slowing down, giving yourself that
Yeah.
grace. Really, really powerful.
Yeah. And I I have like a little altar space. I have multiple altar spaces actually, if I'm honest.
Same.
Um, but I've got one in like our family room where I kind of gather, got more outside stuff inside, I think. I kind of gather bits and pieces. Just to keep, it's just like a visual reminder of what's going on. So at the moment I've got, it's absolutely beautiful, like the lovely kind of dead seed heads of grasses and other plants.
Oh, yes.
So they're really structural. They've kind of gone brown, and I've got a piece of wheat and stuff from the fields. And it just reminds me, okay, this time of year is about harvest. And it's just that touch point. Every time I see it, what am I harvesting from this year? And also what am I gathering in? So just like little visual reminders. And you can do that when you're on your walk. You can gather your bits and pieces.
I always love I have like little stones from different important places I visited or times of
Yes.
my life, and
Yes.
yeah, we really do need those touch points, those visual reminders of, because it's one thing to
Yeah.
write in a journal, but I think for me at least it's easy to forget what my intention
Yes.
has been, but to
Yeah.
have that cue, that almost this object to remind me is so important.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah. And I actually, I always notice if I've been pulled away from myself,
mhm.
one of the things I'll notice is, oh, my altar is out of date.
Right.
I know it sounds silly, but if my altar's up to date, then I know that I've touched base with myself because I have taken the time to go out for a walk. I've taken time to select things that mean something to me, that are going to remind me something about the journey that I'm on, because we're
Mhm.
all on a journey, aren't we? And
Yeah.
I also think in doing that, it gives you a greater reverence for life, actually. And that's really important, those feelings of I can't remember the name of the book now. It's probably really obvious, but feelings of awe and wonder, we know, we didn't really need the research to tell us, but we know that those feelings are really important for feeling good, and reducing all of the not so nice bits of being human.
It's true. We need those practices and reminders that replenish us, especially as sensitive people. We need that depth,
Yeah.
and we can look to our natural environment around us to pull that back in, to be that
Mm.
anchor point. And I'm the same way. I can tell when I haven't been practicing because my altar has been untouched, and it could be that could be something else for someone else. If you don't have an altar, um, like have your running shoes been picked up or
Yeah. Yeah.
whatever your practice is. But yeah, just reminders to come back home to ourselves.
Mm.
So we're practicing seasonally, and I'm wondering if, let's say, we have lost our practice, we have maybe neglected those needs. How can we come back to it without guilt or shame? How can we allow ourselves just to
Mm.
come back and not worry about having missed it? Is there anything that helps you make that transition?
Well, I practice and teach mindfulness. And a big part of that is about compassion and cultivating that for yourself. And I think it's just important to remember that we're human. We're gonna get pulled off course. This is the whole point. Um, so it's just personally what I do is I just place a hand on my chest. Anytime I notice I've got pulled off center, I'm like, it's okay. It's okay, honey. It's gonna happen. Welcome back whenever you're ready. And, for me, it might be just stepping outside of the studio where I'm in now, putting my feet on the ground, if it's not too muddy or cold, or again, going out for a walk, or often I'll come to my mat and just lie down, my yoga mat. I might practice some yoga to reconnect with my body, because sometimes, you know, if you've been in your head and you've gotten pulled away from yourself, and I've done this myself, and I'll think, right, I'm going on a walk. That's what I'm going to do. Especially if you're in an overthinking loop, you can walk that route and not have attended to anything on it. You could have spent the whole time in your head. And so if I'm in one of those moments where my mind is really leading, I will need to come back to my body first, which is where I might do a little bit of yoga or some kind of somatic practice. And then I'll be like, okay, now I can go out on a walk. But yeah, I think first and foremost, it's just remembering you're human and being kind to yourself, and just repeatedly, it's like being that inner parent, isn't it? And the more you do it, the easier it becomes. And I think it's accessible for everybody, even if you don't necessarily feel it yet, you can offer it. You can, you know, you can think in your mind, oh, how would I speak to my kid, or how would I speak to my friend? You can, one of my teachers says, fake it till you make it. You know, you can give it a go, and actually over time, and the body doesn't know. If you place your hand on your chest, the body doesn't know who it's from or what. It can receive it, whether you're not quite there yet. Because I know that, you know, self-love and kindness can be really, really hard, especially if you've gotten into, you know, those habits of putting other people's needs above your own, or being heavily critical of yourself. It can be tricky.
Yes, we do. You know, you mentioned earlier we're human and it's okay to have these ebbs and flows. That's something I have finally just softened into. Like, I'm going to be coming back and forth to my practices, and that's okay. And
Yeah.
I think the most important part for me is that always find my way back. And
Yeah.
yeah, and that's
I
okay.
in
And
Sorry, I
yeah,
was just going to say,
yeah,
in mindfulness, you
mm-hmm.
know, the point of mindfulness is the moment
Yes,
you catch the mind wandering off. So the
yes,
same goes for self-care. You know, the point of self-care is the moment you notice you need it.
yes,
Of course, you can do preventative self-care if you like, but it's okay to notice that you've gone off. It's fine.
exactly. And I think we always will.
Of course we will, yeah, because
Right.
we're having a human experience. We interact with
Yes.
other people. You know, it's life is not easy.
It's not, right? But can we create permission to be those humans, having
Mm,
that human
yeah,
experience?
I think also
Yeah.
with with the seasonal living, it gives you greater understanding of ebb and flow, because that's what's happening in the season. You know, so over the summer, generally people tend to be more out there and more social, and so we can lose a little bit of thread of connection to ourselves, a little bit, depending on how much you want to socialize over the summer. But generally we do. I did, and I needed a lot of alone time. um but knowing that, and going in knowing, okay, it's this time of year, this is what's going to happen, but I'm going to pen in a date with myself. Or just when you are getting to that point of, oh, okay, I've been out in the world too much, you know, that's the turning point where you go, okay, it's time to return.
Mm-hmm. Right. And just listening to that call.
Mm,
Yeah. Earlier you mentioned that, when you get a little lost or life has been a little hectic, you just come back to your body, you get on your mat, you go for a walk,
mm.
maybe put a hand on the chest. Can you say more about why that part is so important to reconnect with our bodies?
That's where we experience everything, isn't it?
Oh, that's
It's where we
true.
experience everything. If we're in our bodies, it's where we experience everything. But I think for me, it started with, it was the first, I remember my first yoga class, not my very first yoga class, because that was when I was 16, but my very first yoga class when I got back into it, it was after my first son, and I remember that feeling of like, oh crikey, I'd completely forgotten you, like as in talking to my body, wow, I'd completely forgotten you. And in reconnecting with my body, I really started to realize how much I had been not hearing from it. Gut issues and a really, really very hypervigilant nervous system. And so that was my first like realization. And so I obviously kept at it. And then what happened magically was I started to feel like what it was like when my nervous system was regulated. And that was quite a new experience for me. And then what happens is you reconnect to your intuition. And that's just, it makes me emotional, or it makes me feel emotional just thinking about it because, I think the whisper had always been there. I think as a HSP, you can't not feel that, it's just a feeling. But to then reconnect with your body and eventually then get so connected, you're in tune with your intuition. It's really powerful because that's when I think it's when the HSP then becomes really empowered.
Yes, when you're in contact with that inner wisdom, so
Mm,
important. It's what
mm,
makes us us, I think, that depth
yeah.
of experience.
Yes.
What for you was so powerful about intuition specifically? What does that mean to you? I'm curious because obviously you got
Yeah.
an emotional reaction there. I'm just curious what it is
Mm,
for you.
I think I think it's about up until that point, my life really had been driven by other people. And, it doesn't happen overnight. The intuition doesn't suddenly go, right, I think you should quit your job, do this, etc., etc. But that return to my intuition has allowed a steady process of me being the kind of author of my own life, if you like, and making choices for myself. And, it's from that place where you can start to offer care and compassion towards yourself. It's so freeing. It's freeing
So
to live for
freeing.
yourself. Yeah.
Like when the intuition is there, it's a sign that you are back in your body, you are back in the
Yeah.
driver's seat of your own life,
Yeah.
that you're able to live a life in alignment with your needs. It's
Yeah.
such a symbol of so much going right.
Mm,
And I
yeah.
imagine being able to access a lot more of the positive experiences of being highly sensitive, like
Yeah.
being more intuitive or creative or empathetic.
Hmm.
Yeah, because when we're disconnected, we lose that. I mean, it's like you said, it's
Yeah.
still a whisper,
Yeah.
but it can be hard to not only hear it, but to listen to it or to
Definitely to
let it
listen to
guide
it
you.
is,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. Because it's
Hmm.
so quiet and, other people's noise, if you like, is so much louder. We're predisposed to for that, we're so sensitive to what's going on around us. But, with that thread of perhaps getting caught in people pleasing and maybe not having great boundaries and covering up your own needs and all of that kind of stuff, it magnifies the stuff out there and it really diminishes it to a very tiny little whisper. And so when you start reconnecting back to that, it I can still feel there's a couple of little moments where I had these kind of little real connecting moments that created quite significant change in my life, where I can still feel that kind of exhilaration of, oh, wow, okay, this is what I need, this is what I want. And I actually can give myself permission to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Not only you're hearing it, but you're responding to it,
Mm.
honoring your needs
Yeah.
in there.
Yeah.
Nichola, if you could leave us with one message for anyone who's wanting to live more in alignment with their needs, who's wanting to listen to those internal whispers,
Mm.
what would that message be?
I think maybe just start simple. Just start with something simple, like any of the things we've spoken about today. Maybe it's just, a solitary walk that you plan in once a quarter or a couple of times a quarter. Um, I really quite like the equinoxes and solstices as pause points, where you might light yourself a candle and just sit with your journal and just you don't need to have any agenda, just doodling, free writing. There's a wealth of resources out there if you're looking for something more structured, but just starting simple, um, by getting outside, noticing the change of the seasons. Maybe like we've talked about, you can be like a little I don't know, somebody gathering, foraging for bits and pieces that you can place somewhere just to remind you. So just starting simple. And like we've said, it doesn't matter if you get thrown off, just allowing yourself to do that and coming back when you can.
Yeah, that's it. Starting with where you are and allowing
Mhm.
yourself to let it be imperfect and show up
Yeah,
as in whatever way that you can. Whether
yeah,
it's a 5 minute walk or it's a 2 hour walk or you're
yeah.
gathering something just on maybe the change of the season versus every full moon.
Yeah.
There's just so
And
many ways.
yeah, sorry, I was just gonna say, and not like feeling like it's something that you should do, and oh my God, it's the solstice, and I've not done anything for the solstice. Just yeah, don't overcommit. Don't, just think about, okay, what is doable for me now? And let it be something that feels like a treat.
Love that. What is
Mm,
doable for me now? And
yeah,
let it be an enjoyable treat, not a chore.
yeah,
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And just want to, this was a really inspiring conversation. It's not something I honestly have thought as much about, although definitely someone who's impacted by the seasons and
mm,
inspired, especially as we're coming into a new season, to bring more intention to that transition and
yeah.
listen to my needs. I know others will enjoy this conversation as well. And you have lots of resources that you're sharing with us, which I'm so grateful for. You have a free autumnal self-care pack when folks sign up for
Mhm.
your email list. Folks can join your monthly sensitive soul space, which sounds really lovely, with meditations, therapeutic yoga, other seasonal resources. And then you're generously offering 20% off your yoga therapy packages with the code sensitive stories. And I'm wondering, Nichola, if you could share a little bit more for folks who don't know, what is yoga therapy or what does that look like working with you in that
Yeah,
way?
sure. I think it's still a fairly new modality, but it's just, honestly, it's just brilliant. I think it's a brilliant modality. Obviously, I'm going to say that, but it, I love it because it's holistic. So it obviously looks at all layers of experience. It's not just the body, it's, the breath, your energy, your mind, your emotions, what's going on for you spiritually. And so when I work with a yoga therapy client, we spend quite a lot of time just really looking at the person as a whole, um, in lots of conversation. I do have quite a long form that we go through because it just helps me to build up a picture, so that we can understand what's going on for them in their body. Are there any aches and pains that they're struggling with? Um, what's going on in their mind space. And crucially, when working with sensitive and neurodivergent people, what are their nuances? What are their sensitivities? What are they hoping to get out of it? What's their lifestyle like? Oh, a big, big picture. And then what happens in yoga therapy, and this is true for whatever your specialism is, and mine happens to be in working with neurodivergence, is we can sort of cherry pick, if you like, the practices and tools from the world of yoga and apply them for the client. So adapt them for the client and for whatever their needs are. It also allows us to look at that person as a whole through various yogic lenses. So there's a lovely model called the kosher model, for example, which is one of the, I don't know if you're familiar with that, If you're familiar in the world of yoga, no.
I
Essentially,
know yoga, but I haven't heard of that one, so I'm curious to hear a little bit more.
yeah, there's a few different lenses from the world of yoga, and this is one that I like to use because it essentially looks at the different layers of experience. So the body, the breath, the mind space, emotions, your intuitive body, and then something called the bliss body, which is essentially like your soul or your sense of joy and that kind of thing. And you can really kind of then start to see, okay, well, which layer of that experience is needing some support. And so what I suggest or facilitate in session really is dictated by the client, both in the session itself, but also with whatever their longer term goal is in mind. And it could be movement, it could be kind of more yoga-y looking things, if you like. It could be a meditation, it could be quite a lot of talk, actually, and just looking at things and bouncing, allowing them to offload something, or explore things. Often when I'm working with highly sensitive people or neurodivergent people, it's usually women, um, there's a couple of themes that we work with. Often it's about connecting them back with their body, and that feeling of interoception and just kind of sensing themselves, their energy, as well as connecting them to their emotional body. So helping them to understand what they're feeling. When we get caught up in the head, we can lose touch with, oh, actually, I'm actually feeling some shame or whatever it might be. And holding space for that to move through the body. And there are various things that we might use to help that move through, or it might just be holding space and seeing what happens. So there's definitely the reconnection to the body. There's also this common theme of helping people reconnect to their intuitive wisdom as well, as we've already discussed. And sometimes this tends to kind of lead into a little bit of parts work as well. That sometimes creeps in. It depends on the client and where they're at. And then ultimately, it's about working with that person to figure out together self-care practices or lifestyle changes that are then going to help that person move forward in their lives. And it's such a beautiful process. I absolutely love it.
It sounds wonderful and just perfect for anyone who's sensitive or neurodivergent, where you're really customizing, you're allowing yourself to show up whatever way you need to and allow the practices to kind of flow with what you're experiencing. And I don't think we often get that opportunity. We're maybe putting ourselves in a box,
Yeah.
even in our healing process. So
Yeah.
to have that space where there's fluidity, I imagine is so
Yeah.
healing. Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like sometimes it's like a little bit of a jump start for folks. If life's gotten a little bit
Yeah.
chaotic,
Mm-hmm.
it's like sacred space where they can then kind of reconnect.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Sacred, protected space.
Yeah.
So important for us.
It really is, yeah.
It really is. Well, Nichola, thank you so much again for this conversation.
Oh,
Just
thank you.
so beautiful.